Jack the Jackass. In Hokum, Bauman is a writer haunted by past trauma who begins experiencing strange events during his stay at an isolated hotel in Ireland. One of the film's most disturbing moments happens when a children's TV show suddenly appears on the screen. In it, a grotesque creature shows up, and many viewers assumed it was a rabbit, but that's not actually the case. The character is in fact a donkey named Jack the Jackass, which completely changes the meaning of the scene.
Dear Jack, that's me. My name is Bauman.
What's most interesting is that the character's origin comes from a real childhood trauma experienced by the film's director, Damien McCarthy. In interviews, he revealed that the inspiration came from one of the scariest scenes of his childhood, the classic Pinocchio sequence where boys are transformed into donkeys. In the film, that reference serves a very specific purpose. As a child, was watching television at the exact moment the accident occurred in which he killed his own mother. Since then, his mind has associated that children's program with the worst moment of his life. That's why Jack returns decades later. The character represents the guilt has carried since childhood, the goats. One of the film's strangest elements involves the dead goats that appear throughout the story. The first time, it seems like nothing more than a local oddity, but like almost everything in this story, there's a much deeper meaning hidden behind it. Jerry explains that the goats consume mushrooms growing in the forest and, under their effects, become attracted to reflections from vehicles. They climb onto the cars to stare at their own image. It sounds like a random piece of information, but it's actually a perfect summary of Ohm's journey. For years, the writer spent his life running from the past. He tries to hide the guilt over his mother's death behind sarcasm, alcohol, and an extremely rational view of the world. But once the mushrooms enter the picture, all those barriers begin to collapse. Just like the goats, Ohm is ultimately forced to face his own reflection. And there's a very clever connection to another detail in the film. While the goats search for answers in the reflections of cars, the audience searches for clues in the reflections of Ohm's glasses. But we'll get to that in a moment. The glasses. By the end of the film, we discover that Albie slipped hallucinogenic mushrooms into Ohm's drink, and that small detail makes us wonder whether the things he experienced were real or not. With that in mind, the director left a hidden clue that helps separate reality from hallucination: the protagonist's glasses. Throughout several scenes, whenever Ohm encounters something frightening, the camera cuts to a close-up of his face. The trick lies in the reflections on the lenses. If what he's seeing truly exists within the story, it appears reflected in his glasses. The best example happens during the scene where Ohm watches Jack speaking on television. The moment feels disturbing and completely real, but the glasses reveal the truth. Looking closely, the reflection shows nothing but static on the screen. That reveals that the entire interaction was happening only inside his mind. The door. One of the saddest hidden details in the hotel appears in the basement and goes unnoticed by many viewers. When Ohm goes downstairs to see what's there, on one of the walls there's a chalk drawing of a door. At first glance, it seems like just another strange symbol scattered around the setting. But when we put the pieces together, the drawing takes on a devastating meaning. Before the main events, Fiona shows a strong interest in local legends and folklore. She believes there is truth hidden within the region's old stories, while Ohm dismisses them all as superstition. To him, they're simply tales created to scare tourists. But the chalk door proves that Fiona took those stories far more seriously than it seemed. When she became trapped in the basement, she turned to the only knowledge she had. Using information from the book, she drew a protective door on the wall in hopes of creating an escape route or a barrier against the evil approaching her. That small mark also serves as confirmation that the hotel's legends were real. When Ohm finds the drawing, he realizes Fiona genuinely believed those stories. For the first time, he begins accepting that the rules of that place don't follow ordinary logic. The most ironic part is that Ohm picks up the same piece of chalk Fiona used and later uses it to protect himself from the witch. Because as Fiona said earlier,
if you ever find yourself being chased by a witch, draw a circle around you. Keep you safe.
Fear of rabbits. When Ohm first discovers Fiona's body in the dumbwaiter, she's wearing a rabbit costume. That detail becomes even more meaningful when we learn an interesting fact about Damien McCarthy. The director has revealed that one of the films that terrified him most as a child was Watership Down, a 1978 British animated film that fooled many viewers with its innocent appearance. Despite being a cartoon about rabbits, the story contains extremely dark situations and turned rabbits into symbols of fear for an entire generation. That influence is clearly visible in Fiona's character. At first, it seems like a playful costume choice, but later we discover she becomes one of the story's greatest victims. The result is an immediate association between the character and the idea of prey. While Mal manipulates events like a predator, Fiona visually takes on the role of the helpless animal that eventually becomes trapped. The turnips. There's a historical detail hidden in the hotel's decorations that almost everyone misses. During the Halloween party, the setting is filled with illuminated, frightening faces, but if you look closely, you'll notice something strange. They aren't pumpkins. The decorations are actually carved turnips. It may seem like a random artistic choice, but it's one of the most authentic details in the entire film. Since the story takes place in Ireland, Damien McCarthy chose to honor the true origins of Halloween. Long before the famous orange pumpkins, Celtic people carved turnips during Samhain, a festival marking the transition into winter and the time when the the worlds of the living and the dead were believed to be closest. According to local legends, these illuminated turnips were used to ward off evil spirits and protect families during the night. Beyond that, the detail helps reinforce the film's folk horror identity. The lighter? At one point, Ohm discovers a lighter hanging among the objects suspended from the ceiling. At first, it seems like just another creepy piece of decoration, but it ends up confirming a story many people had already dismissed. Earlier, Albie tries warning Ohm about the dangers of the hotel. Clearly shaken, he explains that he once encountered the witch and lost his lighter while escaping. The problem is that Ohm doesn't believe a single word. With his skeptical mindset, he dismisses everything as exaggeration and even uses the word
Hokum,
meaning nonsense or foolish talk. But the basement proves that Albie was telling the truth. When the lighter appears among the objects collected by the witch, it becomes clear that the encounter really happened. The film's title itself becomes an irony aimed at Ohm, who spent much of the story rejecting warnings that could have saved both his time and his sanity. The detail becomes even more interesting when we notice the other objects hanging from the ceiling. Keys, flashlights, and forgotten belongings form a kind of macabre collection. It feels as if the witch keeps souvenirs from everyone who has crossed her path. The guardian angels. The ending becomes even more interesting when we realize that Ohm isn't saved by just one person. In reality, two of the most important figures in his life directly contribute to his survival, each in a different way. The first is his mother. After spending decades carrying guilt over the accident that caused her death, Ohm finally confronts that trauma in the basement. Chained by the witch and with no apparent way out, he reaches the lowest point of his entire journey. That's when his mother's spirit appears. Unlike the terrifying visions that haunted him throughout the film, this encounter is calm and comforting. When she forgives him and tells him he cannot stay there, something changes completely. The scene isn't just emotional, it represents the moment Ohm finally lets go of the guilt that has followed him since childhood. And there's an interesting detail. Right after this encounter, he finds the small hacksaw that allows him to cut through his chains. His mother herself was responsible for placing that tool in his path. In fact, it's the very same mini hacksaw that Fiona used at the beginning of the film to save him from his suicide attempt. But the fight isn't over yet. The eyes. The ending of the film hides a detail so subtle that most people never notice it. And interestingly enough, it may answer one of the story's biggest questions. Who operated the dumbwaiter when Ohm was trapped in the basement? Earlier, the film establishes a very important rule. During his first trip downstairs, Ohm has to program the little golfer toy to automatically press the elevator button after a certain amount of time. That's because the button in the basement is broken. In other words, without someone activating the mechanism, there's no way out. But during the climax, everything happens differently. The fire consumes the building, Mal is nearby, and Ohm rushes downstairs without preparing any escape plan. When he realizes the situation, he's completely trapped. That's when something strange happens. Mysteriously, the elevator rises at the exact moment he needs to escape. The camera makes a point of showing Fiona's body one final time, and that's where the detail comes in. Her eyes are open, but when Ohm finally escapes, her eyes are shown closed. It may seem like a continuity error, but many viewers believe it was intentional. The interpretation is that Fiona finally found peace after helping Ohm escape, since he was one of the few people who genuinely tried to uncover what happened to her. And perhaps, as a final act of gratitude, Fiona became the unseen force that pressed the button and allowed Ohm to escape that hell alive. The final voice. After escaping the chains and riding the dumbwaiter upward, Ohm is still trapped inside a hotel engulfed in flames. He almost makes it out but collapses from the smoke. That's when Fiona seems to return once again. The film never clearly reveals who is speaking, and that's exactly what makes the moment so interesting. The first interpretation points to Fiona, but there's another equally compelling possibility. Many viewers believe the voice belongs to his mother. What's fascinating is that the scene works perfectly either way. Whether it's Fiona's voice or his mother's, the meaning remains the same. Throughout the story, Ohm is haunted by ghosts from his past. By the end, however, those very spirits become the ones helping him survive. The witch's marks. One of the smartest things about the story is that it never completely answers whether the witch is real. Much of that ambiguity is hidden within the creature's design. The witch's appearance was inspired by fungi and mushrooms found in Irish forests. Her skin, tattered clothing, and even her hair resembled decaying organic matter. That becomes even more interesting once we learn that Albie slipped hallucinogenic mushrooms into Ohm's drink. From that moment, an unsettling possibility emerges. What if the witch is nothing more than a projection created by his mind? But the film refuses to make things easy. While her appearance supports the hallucination theory, it also perfectly matches the legend of the Cailleach, a supernatural figure associated with nature, winter, and transformation. The definitive answer only arrives during the final minutes. At the hospital, after all the chaos is over, a small detail goes unnoticed by most people, but it completely changes the way you see this scene. Throughout the story, there always seems to be a rational explanation available. When Albie admits he drugged the whiskey, it feels as though we've finally received the answer to everything. Suddenly, the monsters, the witch, and the terrifying visions could all be explained as products of an altered mind. But the director uses one final detail to completely destroy that theory. Visible on Ohm's wrists are physical marks left behind by the basement chains. They're not ordinary bruises. The stains carry the rusty appearance of the old metal that held him captive during his confrontation with the witch. And that changes everything. A hallucination can alter someone's perception, but it can't leave real marks on a person's body. Because of that, those wounds serve as definitive proof that the horror he experienced was real. The missing body. One of the most important clues about the supernatural rules of the story appears only at the very end, when we learn the fate of the bodies recovered after the hotel fire. It's a brief detail, but it helps explain exactly how the witch's form of judgment works. According to reports following the tragedy, authorities managed to recover the remains of Fiona and Jerry from the wreckage. However, one absence stands out. Mal simply vanished, and that appears to be entirely intentional.
They found remains. Fiona and Jerry. Mal? His car was found outside. They're looking for him.
Fiona was a victim. Throughout the story, she suffers the consequences of other people's actions and pays the price for crimes she never committed. That's why her body remains in the world of the living. Jerry occupies a more complicated position. Although he participated in secrets and lies and even killed his wife, his actions came from compassion rather than cruelty, since she was suffering from a painful illness.
Yeah, that's right. They said you killed your wife.
Yeah, that's true. She was in a lot of pain.
Mal, however, receives a completely different fate. Throughout the film, he represents greed, manipulation, and violence. So when the witch finally reaches him, she doesn't even leave a body behind. It's as though he has been removed from ordinary reality and dragged somewhere beyond human rules. That difference creates a kind of moral balance in the ending. It's almost as if the witch functions as a karmic force that punishes men who commit violence against women. Fiona is innocent, Jerry is flawed but finds some redemption. Mal, on the other hand, receives the ultimate punishment. A shared universe? One of the coolest hidden discoveries in the movie involves director Damien McCarthy's previous works. For those who have seen Caveat and Oddity, several Easter eggs are scattered throughout the hotel. The most famous one is the appearance of Olga's parents from Caveat. In a few scenes at the reception, they can be seen quietly checking in among the other hotel guests. Another Easter egg involves the iconic mechanical rabbit from Caveat. The rabbit's head can be seen sticking out of the woman's bag, a detail confirmed by the director himself that goes unnoticed by most viewers. The references don't stop there. The reception desk bell also makes a return after appearing in Oddity. It may look like nothing more than part of the hotel's decor, but it's another subtle nod from Damien McCarthy connecting his films within the same universe. The bottle. The novel Ohm Bauman writes throughout the story ultimately reveals far more about him than it initially seems. Called The Conqueror, it functions almost like a mirror of the protagonist's mind. In the first version of the story, a conqueror crosses a desert alongside his son in search of treasure. When he discovers a map trapped inside a bottle, he decides to smash the bottle against his own son's skull in order to break it open. That dark ending perfectly reflects Ohm's emotional state at the time. The Conqueror represents two figures at once. The first is Ohm's alcoholic father, who spent years blaming his son for the accidental death of his mother. Meanwhile, the bottle symbolizes the alcoholism that destroyed the family. But there's a second layer. The Conqueror is also Ohm himself. Since childhood, he has believed he deserves punishment for what happened. That's why he creates a story so cruel and hopeless. If his characters can't be happy, neither can he. After the events at the hotel, everything changes. In the new version of the book, the Conqueror tries to save his son, who throws the bottle away. Instead of repeating the tragedy, the two reconcile. When we see the bottle land in the sand, it falls beside a ram's skull. It's a brief image, but it perfectly summarizes Ohm's transformation. At the beginning, the desert was a hopeless place. The story reflected exactly how Ohm viewed the world. He was trapped by guilt over his mother's death and believed that past mistakes could never be repaired. So much so that he attempted suicide, only to be saved by Fiona. After the events at the hotel, everything changes. The new ending abandons violence and replaces conflict with reconciliation between father and son. The desert remains harsh and unforgiving, but now hope exists within it, and that's where the skull becomes important. The choice of a ram doesn't seem accidental. Across many traditions, the animal is associated with sacrifice. By showing only the remains of the ram beside the discarded bottle, the film suggests that this cycle has finally ended. Ohm no longer needs to punish himself for the rest of his life or continue sacrificing his own happiness because of an accident that happened when he was a child. So, is there any other hidden detail we didn't include in this video? Let us know in the comments. On screen is a video where we show every moment Pennywise is secretly hidden in the background of the It movies. Click and watch. See you there.